whole time we have together here. So I will share a little bit more about what I do kind of in the day-to-day life of a state climatologist. I kind of get that question a lot, and I think that might be of interest of other ways that maybe we can work together in the future, or maybe if I can bring some other collaborators or coordination activities to help you as you move forward with the regional water system. So this is a picture of the Missouri River from 212 on the west side of the bridge.
Sorry, Laura, can I interrupt for a second? I'm not seeing your slides. Is anybody else seeing the slides?
I see them.
You see them? Okay.
Oh.
All right. I just wanted to make sure they're showing up. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. I try that again. That work?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. All right. So there's the Missouri River from 212 on the east or the west side. I took that a little while ago, probably in the fall, so not super recent. But to get to, and it was introduced that I am based out of Aberdeen Regional Center. I'm originally from the Twin Cities in Minnesota and have lived on all across the country, a couple different places since then, but glad to be here in South Dakota where my husband grew up, and so we do live out on the family farm just northeast of Aberdeen. So I think we're pretty well, we're going to stay here a while. So just starting off with a couple things that I do, and one of them that's come up more recently is that I have a seat in the state hazard mitigation team, and so that team includes some of the work we do includes the FEMA all hazard plan revision process, including the state drought plan. We also help make those funding decisions when mitigation funds come available. So for example, right now, I believe there's a open call for the mitigation funds that have become available due to the flooding in the southeastern part of the state last year. And also I sit on the state drought task force when that task force is activated. And usually in the spring, we have a consultation with the co-chairs that are both at the state offices in Pierre for ag and natural resources and emergency management. And myself and Dr. Darren Clable from the School of Mines, we collaborate on that quite a bit on drought. And so I grabbed a couple snapshots of some of the things we do there. Darren and I work very closely on the drought monitor, which I'll talk about a little bit later, among other parties across the state. And then that on the right is just a picture of the hazard plan that was just revised recently or was under revision. Just to kind of bounce off the topic of drought, I spend quite a bit of my time looking at drought conditions from week to week. And a lot of that is looking at the U.S. Drought Monitor, as that's a weekly assessment of areas of drought and severity of drought across the country. And more the Drought Monitor is being used to trigger different disaster relief programs. Here in the state of South Dakota, we don't really have funding for drought mitigation or management. You know, in some other states like North Dakota, they have in the past allocated some funds for hay and water relief and things like that for livestock producers. But here in South Dakota, we don't really have a lot, but we do make a few decisions when the drought task force is activated. But getting back to the drought monitor, it does directly tie to some USDA disaster relief programs that are written into the Farm Bill as far as their qualifying criteria using the drought monitor. So we take our job pretty seriously there in taking a close look at those weekly assessments, providing a South Dakota consensus, I should say, as far as what areas we see of drought and how severe, looking at local data and all kinds of data, including precipitation, soil moisture, groundwater, evapotranspiration rates, snowpack, snowfall when we have it, all of those kinds of things. Kind of along with that, I work very closely with the group with NOAA called NIDIS, the National Integrated Drought Information System. And sometimes we do reports kind of like a post-mortem kind of situation, such as the thing in the middle, which is a flash drought assessment that we made after the 2017 drought. That was a very rapid onset drought in the spring of that year. And that affected a lot of the upper Missouri River Basin. So that's a multi-state effort, working with NIDIS on that. And then also, just in general on the right side, they do drought status updates that I contribute to. Just earlier this week, we kind of had a roundup of the region, looking at what are the impacts we're seeing, what are things we can share, resources, information, and so on. So a lot of what I do with the drought monitor is coordinating and gathering data to fit a lot of these kinds of activities, and coordinating with neighboring states, you know, when we have some border areas of drought and so on. We really want to provide the best local data for the drought monitor and to these other assessments. Kind of switching tracks, within the extension part of my job, I do work a lot with both kind of local groups within SDSU Extension. We have our own, I'll call it a climate working group. I don't know that we have a formal name for it, but expanding my reach, since I'm kind of a one-woman band over here. So looking at what can we do for livestock producers, row crop producers, forage, but also engaging with 4-H and our community vitality teams on preparing for, adapting to, mitigating climate risks and hazards across South Dakota. Expanding that beyond our state border, I also lead a North Central Climate Collaborative, which is an extension team mostly focused on agriculture, water, natural resources, those kinds of things. But it is a group of extension folks in a 12-state region from the Dakotas all the way to Ohio down to Kansas. So we have a pretty big region that we include in our North Central Climate Collaborative. We do professional development webinars for our members and other partners. And on occasion, we hold workshops or conferences. We did one of those last summer out in Illinois. Also, a couple national teams I'm on. We have an extension foundation, of which a lot of the land grant universities are a part of, and they have a climate priority action team that's kind of leading more in the strategic way and trying to get a lot of national collaboration together. And so one of the first things we did was just over a year ago, the item on the left there is our climate action plan for cooperative extension. And so we have that document that we're starting with, and we have a number of working groups now that are pushing that forward. And the last thing I want to say is this thing called EDEN, which is the Extension Disaster Education Network. And this is not a new group, but it's kind of new to South Dakota. SDSU has only been a member of this network for a few years, I want to say. We have a group of delegates, they call it, and I'm one of the delegates. And so it really gets to information and resource sharing. They do professional development webinars. They have different working groups on different topics in an annual conference, you know, not unlike a lot of professional societies that you may be a part of. But it's really about resource sharing and networking. And so we are still developing or growing our EDEN team. And I'd like to leave open the question to all the partners that I visit with here, you know, at this time, about how can we help you and how can we collaborate to bring these kinds of resources to either disaster preparedness, response, or recovery. We don't deal so much in the extension world in South Dakota anyway with the immediate response part, but maybe more on the recovery. And some examples might be, you know, we have widespread flooding. Okay, what do we do with all these grain bins that had grain sitting in them? What do we do with cows or livestock that got caught in a blizzard, like in October of 2013, for example? You know, so what kind of resources can we provide both in the planning preparedness side, but also the recovery side? maybe there's some resources that we have that maybe you or your organization might be interested in. So one of the things that I do a lot is talk about climate outlooks. What's happening the next week, 2 weeks, the month, the growing season. You know, I got a lot of questions just this morning about what does all this rain and snow mean in eastern South Dakota? What does this mean for planting and farming and all those kinds of things? Also, you know, depending on the year and the season, drought or flood or both, and severe weather. And severe weather is really a tough one. It's very difficult to forecast on a seasonal basis what we might see as far as tornadoes, hailstorms, those kinds of things. But drought and flood tend to be pretty common topics. And so some example, I'll share a few slides here of the type of information that I share when I'm talking about climate outlooks. First, looking at the next 7 days, total rainfall forecast. This is one of the graphics that I use quite a bit. Certainly, you may have heard the Mississippi River Valley, Ohio River Valley is really going to get hammered here in the next few days. I know they've already had some pretty widespread flooding. But up here, you know, looking at less than half of an inch of rain, and then after today, as it's still raining and snowing up here this morning, looking at really not a lot of moisture coming up in the next 7 days. So I'll say, you know, we've had good moisture. It's soaking into the soil really well. It's a perfect time to be gaining soil moisture right now, as we've been carrying dry soils up until this point, given the drought conditions. And I think this is going to get things started really well, at least for the agriculture side of things, pasture, forage, all of those things really do well, make it April moisture. Looking out the next 1 to 2 weeks or 8 to 14 days, these maps are updated every day. And so you can look at them. They're updated usually around 3 p.m. Central, so about 2 p.m. Mountain Time. Look at the middle of the month now. Temperature is trending upward, more above average. The darker the red, the higher the probability, which often reflects confidence as well, but really seeing a higher probability of warmer than average temperatures here in the middle of the month. So for those with an interest in row crop farming, that's good news, because soils will dry out and they can get out in the fields hopefully pretty soon. On the right-hand side is the precipitation outlook. Again, this is looking at probabilities. So, you know, after the next week, we see something closer towards near normal chances of precipitation. For most of the state, that's something like, probably 3/4 of an inch a week, something like that, in that 2.5 to 3 inch range, depending where you are. So that could still mean we could see some precipitation events. It doesn't mean nothing, but it just means equal chances right now of drier, wetter, near average for that middle week of the month. Along with that, however, we do see an elevated chance of high winds during April 12th to 14th, around that time frame, and that's that kind of outlined area with this brown outlined area. So could see some higher winds during that time, which, you know, we see pretty breezy conditions, but they're comparing this to typical, so even windier than we typically see for a few days anyway. Looking at April for the month overall, this was updated on March 31st, so earlier this week. And we've started off cool and wet. We're looking at warm, potentially dry here in the middle of the month. But then as you look out 3 to 4 weeks out, there's a lot more uncertainty as we get towards the end of April. And so putting all that together, they kind of didn't have any real inclination on temperature or precipitation, either warmer or cooler than average, or wetter or drier than average. We're kind of in this in-between area right now, so where not a lot of consensus in the models and not a lot of confidence either way, given the whole kind of mismatch of things that we've seen in the climate model so far. So hopefully we get something close to normal. That would be great news, and I think we can make some big gains in this early part of the season, early part of the warm season with some precipitation. A little can go a long way at this time of year. And without having elevated temperatures, you know, when we have warmer temperatures, that can exacerbate or make worse our drought situation. So it's nice to see not continuous warm temperatures throughout the whole month. As we look further into the next 3 months, so this is April through June, all pulled together, you start to see this northward creeping of this area that's favored to be warmer than average. Not quite up here into South Dakota, but coming pretty close. But you also see that area that's favored to be drier, which was kind of centered over the Southwest states, really expanding, covering more of the western and central US, including southwestern South Dakota, out where you guys are. So the area that has been hit hardest by drought last year looks like we could see a resurgence of drought again coming this year. And overall, this is the seasonal drought outlook. They start with the U.S. Drought Monitor, and then they look at the end of June. And there could be ups and downs in between, but what's kind of the net result of drought across the country? And in this brown area over all of South Dakota and a lot of our neighboring areas, they expect that drought to persist across this region. Again, without a strong wet signal to really overcome the dry conditions that we carried into the season, and then kind of starting to trend dry, at least in the southwest corner at the end of this period, really looking at maybe some improvements, but not fully getting out of drought by the end of June. And so this is another piece of the puzzle that I've been telling folks, and I think my extension colleagues and I will be working. We just started talking this week about what can we do for information to help share and prepare folks for potential resurgence, a re-intensification of drought in the summer season. So this is looking at July through September, that 3-month period overall, where we see some chance of warmer temperatures compared to average for that mid to late summer period, and also a higher chance of drier conditions. That's the map on the right. So those two pieces put together, again, tell me, wow, we could see a resurgence of drought here, re-intensification. So this doesn't mean that we'll necessarily be dry the whole season, but for those who are growing row crops, I kind of tell them, you know, could see still some timely rainfall that could still make a crop, but overall dry conditions. And I know the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and others who manage water are already preparing for potential lower runoff this year, lower water deliveries, lower flows throughout the system, as we're looking at these dry conditions all across the upper Missouri River Basin and the north central states. So, and that's not uncommon in a summer after a La Nina winter. I'm not going to show those maps, but looking at the history of La Nina winters and the summers follow that, more often than not always, but more often than not here in the Dakotas, we see warmer summers, particularly in western Dakotas, and also drier summers, which is Dakotas all the way down through the Central Plains. So this is not too unusual for a summer following a La Nina winter. So the next piece I wanted to share with you is a little different spin, where looking more at long-term changes in climate, looking more at the adaptation and mitigation pieces. And what do we know about climate trends, projections? What kind of data and tools do we have? And helping to inform decision making that way. So some of these pieces I pull in when I'm working with the state and the FEMA All Hazard Plan, looking at climate risks or how climate amplifies or changes risk of different weather hazards. Also working with tribes in their drought and climate adaptation plans or vulnerability plans. Worked with a handful of those, and still am right now. And so looking even down to the individual level, if there's a farmer or rancher who's interested in thinking about long-term planning on their farm and what are the trends that they see and projections they can expect. So a number of items here that I like to share is looking at average temperature, and not just average temperature, but this is a trend from 1895 through 2024. And you may have seen this kind of thing before, but here in South Dakota, we have about a 2 degree Fahrenheit per century warming trend going on. It's not the same in all seasons. We have actually winters warming faster than any other season, but it's right in line with what we saw with projected changes back in the 90s when we were thinking about climate change really early on in my career. So, you know, now that we're seeing this happen, I have higher confidence that we'll continue to see warming like this, which is what the projections are. Another facet of that I tell folks that may affect you if you're managing water too, is that the daytime maximums, and which isn't always daytime, let's say the maximum temperature and the minimum temperatures are warming at different rates also. So they're both warming, but the minimum temperature, depending where you are in the state, is at least double as fast, at least twice as fast as the maximum temperatures are rising. So that's telling me we have warmer overnight temperatures. That could mean more of a need for energy for air conditioning and cooling at night. Could be hazardous to livestock who may be not adapted to warmer overnight temperatures. The daytime maximums or the maximum temperatures aren't rising as fast, and we're still kind of in what I would call maybe a Goldilocks zone, where we don't see a whole lot of days over 100 degrees or a whole lot of days over 95 degrees yet, which really get to be pretty important for human health. But still, we're seeing warmer temperatures overall. And we're not unusual for our part of the country to see warmer temperatures like this. That's the 3 maps on the left. That's the annual, annual temperature change at the top, and then the winter and the summer. And the winter, again, all across the northern states, we see the winter warming faster than any other season. So South Dakota is very much consistent with what we see across the north central states. On the precipitation side, as I will show in a little bit, our South Dakota trends, we are getting wetter, generally speaking, across South Dakota. But so far, and this is looking at historical data and trends, we've seen it more in the fall and the spring. So the winter and summer maybe aren't capturing most of the story, but we do see seasonal differences also in precipitation. But winter is starting to catch up, so we are starting to see winters get wetter as well, not just the fall and spring seasons that we've seen for the last, number of decades, last few decades at least. And another piece of this that I share with folks is that with the warmer winter seasons, on like looking at agriculture, horticulture, landscapes, ecosystems, we're seeing that affect the ability of plants to survive the winter, and that's what we call the plant hardiness zone. So this is from USDA. Their latest update was about 1.5 years ago, showing warmer zones as they migrate northward with warmer temperatures. This is really reflecting the typical coldest winter temperature. So last year we had a generally warm winter except for the month of February, and we had some really cold days in February and March. But in general, what's our coldest temperature in Rapid City, maybe something of -10, -15 and -10 Fahrenheit. Not to say it doesn't get colder, but that's kind of a typical winter nowadays. And we've seen these zones, as I said, they kind of mentioned, they kind of migrate northward, but they also migrate higher in elevation. So in the Black Hills, you see kind of a mix of the northward migration of these climate zones, and all these orange colors are the areas that got a warmer or a half zone warmer. The areas in the green are ones that got a half a zone cooler. So you tend to see maybe more of those mountain valleys in the Mountain West, and those kinds of areas get colder. But we're seeing some changes maybe ecosystem-wise, landscape-wise, and in our backyard gardens as far as what kind of plants can overwinter and survive. And more you could see maybe some warmer adapted species adapt to our climate here in South Dakota. I just wanted to throw this in there just to remind me to tell you too, we also are seeing longer growing seasons. And this is a map of all the South Dakota counties, and using this freeze date tool from the Midwest Regional Climate Center, all those counties in green are seeing longer growing seasons. And we're seeing them more or less equally start earlier in the spring and end early, and later in the fall. There's one oddball example there with Jackson County. They had a recent number of years that had some really unusually late spring frost. So their data got a little skewed with some late spring frost. But there's a lot of variability in frost dates. So we can look at averages, but year to year, you can't always say, yes, we're going to have an early spring, or yes, we're going to have a later fall. There's a lot of variability year to year, but this is the trends that we're seeing. So on the precipitation side, I mentioned this, nationally speaking, you know, when we look at that national map, yeah, we are getting increasing precipitation, and that is true. Along with that comes increased humidity as well, which is another part of the story here. But statewide, if we look at the long-term trend from 1895 to 2024, we see an increase of about an inch per century. Now that varies a lot by region. I didn't break this down into different regions, but on the eastern side of the state, we see a even steeper trend, getting wetter faster than most of the western part of the state. Not true everywhere, but most areas. If we just look though at since 1950, which is, you know, lifetime of my parents, more or less. And so thinking of like that generation and younger, like what have we experienced? We see even a more rapid increase in precipitation, more like 4 inches per century, if you want to extrapolate that out. So again, we've seen more in the recent decades, more rapid increase in this precipitation across the state of South Dakota. And we expect to see in the long run continued warming, but also some chance, not a lot of high confidence in this part of the country, but some chance of increasing precipitation too. This is looking at 4 different scenarios, 4 different levels of global temperature increasing. And no matter which way you look at it, it looks like there's a little bit of increasing precipitation in our area. But there's a lot of nuance to that as far as how precipitation falls and in what seasons, right? And so one way to look at that is at extreme precipitation. What we're seeing is more rainfall coming in bigger events and fewer of those really small events kind of spread out throughout the year or throughout the season. And so I think this is one aspect that's contributing to more drought, is that we're seeing these larger events, even say 1/2 inch to an inch, you know, rather than a lot of these, you know, 1/4 of an inch type of things. And you have that opportunity for drought to set up really fast in between these precipitation events, especially when you have elevated temperatures. And so I think that's one of the things that we start to see here is increasing drought at the same time as increasing precipitation, if that makes sense. It's kind of two sides of the same coin here. And everywhere in blue here, everywhere across the state, we're seeing increases in precipitation or increases in days with extreme precipitation. Similar, and I know this is just a snapshot of northeastern South Dakota, but it looks a lot the same across the whole state, where the wettest day of the year is becoming wetter. So like the single wettest day of the year is also becoming wetter. And so another way to say that we should be prepared for more extreme precipitation events at any time of year. And just to throw in a piece about severe weather, since I get asked about that a lot, what are the trends in severe weather? And those are really hard, really hard to define and really hard to forecast. But one thing we are seeing is that when we do have days with tornado activity, they tend to be more severe in the more severe only in the way of having more tornadoes per day. So you may have fewer days of tornado activity, but we're seeing more days of the year with several tornadoes on the same day, if that makes sense. So, we're still going to see tornadoes, hailstorms, severe thunderstorms, high winds, those kinds of things here in South Dakota. Those aren't going to go away. But when we do see tornado events or severe weather days, the potential for more tornadoes is higher. So kind of when I'm visiting with folks and thinking about what we might want to be planning for, warmer winters, I've said that, and extreme minimum temperatures that could affect overwintering pests on the agriculture side, but also can bring longer frost-free seasons and potential for higher yield on the agriculture side. But then also brings more weed pressure for a longer period of time. So there's pros and cons to all this. More precipitation falling as rain versus snow. So that's something for a regional water system to consider when you're planning out storage or delivery of water. That trend is changing, partly due to the warmer winters and changing timing of precipitation and change in energy use. So if you're doing anything hydroelectric, which is from Oahe, for example, the changing use of energy needs, both for heating and cooling. We see warmer and wetter conditions, like I said, are a pro and a con to the agriculture side of things. If you're looking at water delivery for agriculture, increases in heavy rain events could increase flood, like flash flood risk, but also increased risk of drought in between those wet periods, as I described. One other thing, thinking of the Black Hills area and more the forested area, we could see changes in urban and rural forest, what we call dynamics. So, we've gone through a whole period of bark beetle infestation, partly with drought exacerbating that. And so the forests are managed, a little differently. And so thinking of both the managed forests, the rural areas of the hills, but also when you're planning development, growing trees and having forested areas really changes how a snow catches, snow melts, different runoff regimes, those kinds of things. For good or for bad, they're kind of a mixed bag there as well. And I think also looking at fire risk in those drier, more arid sides of the state is another thing where we now see large fires really 12 months of the year. We can see fires at any time. Water, you guys are already pretty aware of the increasing population, increase in demand considerations, but also, think of those large fluctuations. I think of a prime example, southeastern South Dakota last year, with that 3-day period in June, having rainfall of a 1,000-year return interval, 8 to 15 inches in 3 days. And then by the end of the year, they're in moderate drought on the drought monitor. Things turned around so fast after that event, just the spigot turned off. And so how can we manage these extremes a little better through planning and preparedness? Flooding, flash flooding, especially in new development. And I kind of use these examples of the eastern side of the state. We haven't seen this so much in the western side of the state, but again, getting back to the very beginning, sitting on the hazard mitigation team, that team has helped support financially through their mitigation funds, different home acquisition or relocation expenses. So there are 4 homes in the floodplain in Sioux Falls just since 2000. This is 2011 till maybe 2021, so maybe that 10-year period. 4 homes that were acquired, mostly a result of 2019. But there's been many others, 26 others in probably that 10-year period that we supported both, or either an acquisition or relocation, and many others in the northeastern part of the state, say in Dade County area as well. So thinking about that long term as development is occurring. And I know Rapid City is really, really smart to this, given the flooding, the record flooding decades ago really kind of set a mark on the city, but certainly taking this into consideration as well on the water side. Energy might not be so much your guys's a concern, but it is something I think on the homeowner side that that we could be thinking about. Also, development-wise, one story I tell is looking at electric facilities for charging vehicles, and I know that's not so much the trend right now, but could bring a broader tourism piece to the area. I know a few years ago, we considered personally buying an electric vehicle, but we couldn't make it to Sioux Falls and back on a cold day, with a hockey player in the car, and there's no place to charge at the hockey rinks, things like that. So thinking of development further down the line and power generation and power use too. And the very last part that's kind of energy related is looking at green infrastructure. And we used to have someone at CSU that looked at this really close. He's since left, but looking at rain gardens and citywide landscaping, which is aesthetically pleasing, but also can manage your runoff and your water situation and flood risk a little bit better as well. So thinking of that on the development side is another consideration too. So I just want to touch on a couple other things that I'm involved in. Being a state climatologist, I get tied into a lot of cool things, and a lot is coordinating with other agencies and other partners. So USDA is a big one with their climate hubs, both in the Northern Plains and the Midwest, but also NOAA with their Central Region Climate Services, and also a pretty unique thing, an international Canadian-US partnership. I grabbed a snapshot on the top right there of some quarterly climate summaries that we put together for the prairies and high plains, the Canadian prairies and US high plains. I do a lot of media interviews, social media type of stuff as well. I mentioned the tribal part. Collaborating with the South Dakota Mesonet is a big piece of what I do as well, and I'll share a couple things of that here in the last few minutes. And also running a volunteer precipitation network, which I do very closely with the National Weather Service offices in South Dakota. It's called COCORAS, the Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network. And that's always fun too, to get people engaged with measuring rain, snow, and hail in their backyard. I wanted to mention the Mesonet here because they are growing their network. They have nearly 100 stations in the ground right now. They're building out to just over 150 is their hope in the Missouri River Basin part of South Dakota. So it's all but the far northeastern corner. And they're also trying to capture the plains, so not so much the higher elevation of the Black Hills, although they do have a station at Jewel Cave, which is a little bit above their elevation that they wanted, but that's a pretty cool location anyway. So they're building out, and their idea here is to do basically measure total water in the system, the precipitation, evapotranspiration, what's in the soil, all of that, trying to capture a whole picture of what's happening to water. So the first primary goal of this is to improve flood forecasting, mostly for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. But other byproducts of that also benefit monitoring for drought conditions, other agricultural tools and data and products that we can put together, things like that. So this is an example of what one of the stations look like. And there's a QR code there too. Measuring all kinds of weather variables: temperature, rainfall, precipitation, wind speed, direction, soil moisture and temperature, snow depth, solar radiation at every station. So this is a map of where they have all the stations so far. They're still looking to fill in a few gaps, and I'll show that map in a bit. But this is where they all are right now, and they're just ramping up for their field season here this year. Snapshot of what this isn't actually current weather, but a snapshot of what that website looks like when you first click into a station and get the current weather, which is reported every 5 minutes. And they also have weather cameras on all of the stations. So they're slowly migrating from a 1-camera system to a 2-camera system. So some stations have 1, some have 2. But I grabbed this snapshot on the left. This is a picture of the station at Sioux Falls that was flooded in June of last year. So this is pretty much at the peak flood. And that yellow and blue ruler that you see is their snow measurement ruler. And it's just a few inches short of 3 feet there. So they just about 3 feet of water. Everything was still operating all throughout the whole event. And you can see on the right side, the water is right up to the bottom of the rain gauge. That's a picture of one of their newer rain gauges that they have out there. And then on the right is the first picture we ever captured of a tornado on the camera. That was from Mound City, which I believe is in Campbell County up in the north central part of the state. So we've caught all kinds of things on camera, which is pretty cool to see. Soil moisture map, our poker chip map we call it, looking at the 5 sensors at different depths at every station, has been a super useful tool, something that I look at quite often. We also have 4-inch soil moisture, both under bare soil and vegetated soil or natural cover. So a lot of people are looking at this now, looking at planting season. Even those who hunt for wild asparagus, I get a couple calls what soil temperature is, those kinds of things. A lot of different uses that I never imagined for some of the data that the Mesonet is providing. And just one last thing here to leave you with is that the Mesonet is still looking for some station hosts to fill in this 150 station network that they're building. They're putting in about 20 to 30 a year for the next 2 years, basically to finish this network out. So all those different colors are all the different zones where they're hoping to get a station filled in. So if you have a friend, family member, neighbor, someone you know, a landowner who might be willing to have a weather station on their property, we'd love to have them reach out and visit with the Mesonet staff and see if that might work out. So there's no cost to the landowner. Everything is self-sufficient on solar power and cell phone connection. And you sign a land use agreement with SDSU so that the technicians have access to the station when they need it. So that is about all I have to share with you. I kind of went through a whole lot of things there that I've done in the last recent years, but I really enjoy the work. I'm glad to be connected with you all today, and feel free to reach out if you have questions or just want to talk about the weather. So thanks, Brenda and Kristen.
Well, thank you very much, Laura. I'm going to open it up to our listeners, or if they have any questions while we have Laura in the hot seat. Go ahead and feel free to ask any questions. All right.
And I might ask one, and hi Laura, good to see you. Thanks for your presentation. The graphs that you showed of both temperature and precipitation since 1895, is it possible to get that just for Western South Dakota?
Yeah, so I use data right from NOAA for that.
Okay.
So yeah, there are a few ways to do that. So I could sure share those with you. They had Western South Dakota divided into 3 different regions.
Okay.
So that's why I didn't show it, because it would be a little complicated here. But they also have everything down to the county level, if that's ever of interest as well. Yeah.
Well, thank
But I
you.
can send those to you offline, Cheryl.
Okay, thank you, Laura.
Mm-hmm.
Cheryl, that would be great if you'd share those with us also.
Of
Does
course.
anybody have any questions about their areas specifically, or what a lot of great knowledge, but wow, you must be very, very busy.
Yeah, it's busy, but it keeps it interesting, and I love the work. So
That's great. We're glad to have you back in the state of South Dakota.
yeah, it's been great so far.
Well, if seeing no further questions by the group, I just wanted to say thank you, everybody, for coming. I'm Kristen Conzit, and I'm the Executive Director of Western Dakota Regional Water. I wanted to point out that our next quarterly technical showcase will be July 11th, and that will be from Department of Ag and Natural Resources. And speaking is our Andy Brules and Tina McFarland from Danner. So we look forward to seeing you then. And Laura, I will make sure that our members have contact information for you. As you said, you've got your hand in a lot of different pies, so it would benefit our members very much.
All right, great. Thank you. I'd love to work with you again.
Great. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.